innovative methods for researching power in a post-Snowden era. I'm a lecturer in the Journalism Studies department, and I'm co-hosting this event with Lisa Stampnitsky, who will wave at everyone. She's in the politics department. And we've been lucky enough to gain funding today for this event from the Sheffield Methods Institute, as well as Journalism Studies and Politics, in order to be able to bring our speakers here and offer you some refreshments. So I want to extend my thanks to them, first of all. So it remains for me to thank all of our speakers for agreeing to present for us today, and thanking them all for coming. Also everyone in the room, really, all of the attendees for making this journey here from far and wide. We're really looking forward to your contributions. I should also mention that some of the inspiration for this workshop came from a seminar series that I was CI on that has been taking place over the last year or two, which Bianca Kier is the primary investigator on, which is debating and assessing transparency arrangements, privacy, security, surveillance and trust. So we hosted one of the events here last year, and it really sort of highlighted the importance of these kinds of challenges that are being raised for researchers and journalists and anybody who's tackling the difficult topics related to power in a post-Snowden era.
Okay, well, you kind of summed up essentially what I'm doing, but yeah, thank you for having me along today. And yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about work that I'm doing on technologies that detect information about emotions. And that, I guess that kind of has wide application in terms of the industrial sector, in terms of policy, but also signals intelligence and surveillance and politics field as well. As mentioned, it's an AHRC study, but the idea for today really is to talk a little bit about the research itself, and then talk about access. And I think particularly if we've got PhD students here as well, that might be some of the more interesting stuff. It's like, well, how do you actually talk to these big companies? How do you talk to Facebook? How do you talk to Google? How do you talk to IBM? How do you access people in signals intelligence? And then I've got some questions for those doing sensitive research with the links. And I've got some suggestions of answers to those questions, but also some questions that we might want to be thinking about ourselves in terms of how we do research into hidden power. So as mentioned, whereas other people are going to talk primarily about national security issues, I'm more interested in the commercial side of things. So in terms of the project, what I'm interested in is technologies that detect information about emotion. So that includes things such as sentiment analysis, such as scraping Twitter for information about emotion, about what we like, what we don't like, in terms of information about pictures and pictures that we post online. Again, in terms of emotions, in terms of whether we're happy, whether we're sad, whether we're positioned with a brand, and what we feel about brands. But I guess I'm primarily into the more biometric side of things. When we talk about biometrics, biometric simply means of the body. And so I'm interested in things in terms of technologies that collect information about heart rates, technologies that collect information about our facial expressions, technologies that collect information about not just what we say, but how we say things. What I'm seeing is a range of interest from different industrial sectors who are interested in emotional life. So it's not just they're not just collecting information about our interests, where we are, who we're with, who our friends are, but again, and also on how we actually feel. So this sense, this notion of emotion is increasingly becoming more prevalent. So in terms of what I've been doing, I've interviewed around between 70, 80, I guess what you would call elites, drawn from a range of companies. And they're primarily in the US, so I spent quite a bit of time out in Silicon Valley talking with companies there, and also in Europe and London as well, talking with companies here. Some of the big companies, lots of startups as well. So some of which you'll have heard of: Facebook, Google Health, IBM, Ogilvy and Mather, Havas. But again, lots and lots of little startups, and there's lots of interesting things to be found there. but also policymakers in Brussels and people working in signals intelligence as well. So I guess the question now is, how do you do this? I'd be interested to see how other people come at this question. Steve, I know you kind of have quite innovative means of kind of accessing a list, so you're going to talk about that in a moment. But I guess the way I've kind of approached it is slightly more, I guess, kind of formally in a sense. And really, I'm just going to kind of give you a little list in terms of how you do it. And I think the first thing, in terms of being able to access and ask difficult questions to companies, you kind of have to speak the language of mutual interest. And I think, when you're talking to businesses, when you're asking for people's time, again, it's about this notion of mutual interest. And what do they get from speaking to you? So in terms of when you pitch your email, when you pitch your call, when you pitch your tweet to these companies, to these organisations, and I guess this isn't just commercial organisations, but this is, again, signals intelligence agencies, what do they get from meeting you? So when you write that email, say, my research is interesting because of X, Y, Z. So try not to kind of, it is a request, but frame it as an offer. And I think that's kind of a key point. I think something else that's quite interesting to do as well is try and meet people on their home turf. And I think, and this is kind of a question of culture. So in terms of kind of norms, values, expectations, if you meet people in their own settings, you're more likely to get positive and more open responses. So for example, that might be conferences, it might be technology festivals. But kind of places where people feel comfortable, where they feel on their home turf. And I guess, yeah, that kind of does seem to generate kind of more open conversation. And also speak their language as well. So, sometimes when we kind of, particularly for those of us who come from kind of a more critical perspective, a more critical background, it can be tempting to kind of use our own jargon. I think we should be doing it otherwise. Again, it's about speaking their own language and knowing their culture. And again, phrase questions carefully. If you're trying to get sensitive information, think about how you're positioning those questions. And by that, I mean, there's kind of certain language which is charged, but these questions, this information that we're trying to get, the questions can be framed in different ways. And position them in terms of the flow of the conversation. So as you kind of write your questions, you're thinking about the structure of your interviews. Again, think about where you're going to position those kind of slightly thorny, those slightly more difficult questions. And I think in terms of how to access organisations, finish the interview by asking if there's anybody else you should speak with. And I found that really useful. So when I get to the end of a conversation, is there anybody else I should speak with? A, they'll give you the names of people. And B, if you ask nicely, they'll make the introductions for you. And certainly in the commercial setting, because it moves pretty quickly, people quite often just send LinkedIn requests there and then. So, and they can be with really high-level people. And it's easy, it's not a difficult proposition, but it's something that I found really valuable. Again, having them make introductions for you. Although things are going pretty well with the research that I'm working on, but I certainly don't have all of the answers. And there are some parts of the research process that I found quite tough going. And this, I guess, kind of the next few points that I want to mention are kind of things that I'm having issues with, but perhaps I'll be interested to see kind of where we get to with some of these questions throughout the day. But particularly on the kind of research ethics side of things. And although I've done kind of everything by the book, and I've thought through all of this, but I'm particularly interested in this notion of the sincere researcher. Because when I'm kind of approaching these interviews, I'm mindful that there's kind of certain bits of information that I want to get that they might not want to reveal. And when engaging with actors from diverse backgrounds, how forthcoming should one be about one's own ideological position? So when I'm meeting these people are kind of approaching me, and they're approaching me very openly, very warmly, very sincerely. And from my point of view, I've kind of always like, I'm kind of speaking their language, I'm speaking their culture. So I feel a little bit uncomfortable because I don't feel I'm being quite sincere to the moment and to the conversation because I'm trying to get information. I'm a researcher. but that kind of leaves me feeling slightly uncomfortable. I'd be interested to see what other people have got to say about that. Yeah, and I guess as well, in terms of maintaining critical distance and objectivity, I'll be interested to see what people have to say about this. And this notion of, I guess, kind of what in anthropology they call going native. But I think it's fair to say that since starting the research that I'm doing on emotion detection, and given that I have a background in kind of privacy, you know, my views have changed since kind of talking to various industrial actors and talking to people in government, within signals intelligence field. And I probably my attitudes have kind of slightly kind of toned down a little bit. And I'll be interested to know kind of how people's own perspectives have arguably been swayed as they've gone through the research process with hidden elites. I certainly don't find the idea of emotion detection as creepy as I once did. So I'm going to leave it there. So there are hopefully a few kind of questions for us, particularly perhaps this notion around the kind of sincere researcher. Might be interesting to come back to that notion later on today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about my methodology for my recent book on propaganda and counter-terrorism. And it's specifically elite interviewing, which enabled me to document profound changes to how propaganda operated since 9/11. I managed to get revealing interviews that showed rule-breaking and a weakening of structures of legitimacy and oversight that were taking place in the UK and the US. So, but of course interviewing raises a number of issues that must be mediated, such as access to sources, censorship, the reliability of the information you're getting, researcher independence, risk-taking, related ethical problems, even the safety of the researcher. So I'm going to talk about some of these kinds of challenges as much as I can in 10 minutes. And the challenges I faced with the methodology that I was employing in the UK and the US. My study of propaganda stemmed from an interest in elites and elite power. So it was those elites rather than the media content that I was particularly interested in and focused on. And I based some of my analysis on interviews, which was a really risky methodology, if you think about it. And it involved nurturing access with extensive contacts in the US and UK governments, including 76 elite participants, PR professionals working in security, journalists, foreign policy, defense and intelligence personnel as well. Some of the people that I spoke to are pictured here and listed there. Documents are probably more commonly used as a source of information on this topic, but I would argue that, you know, as has been touched on a little bit by Steve, you know, a lot of the time, you know, you look at the documents and actually they're not really what in reality is happening. So they can be very partial or purposeful, or actually completely not correct, not representative of what's really happening. They can't also help us to understand human interaction and why things happen the way they do, motivations in a cultural context. Interviews bring great potential for theory building that attempts to understand the real cultural dynamics, planning and policy making in propaganda, and they can allow us to draw connections between theories and empirical work in the media and social movements as well. They can also lead to you becoming somewhat going native, as Andy was talking about as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of pressures that you're placed under and the worry of not being manipulated in any way. So there are obvious problems with asking someone in an inevitably closed elite group to talk about their propaganda strategy. And access can be hard, and there's often a lot of resistance from these kinds of people to some, you know, researcher who just wanders up and says, you know, can we talk about propaganda? Other researchers looking at propaganda have experienced hostile reactions to their critical research. Noam Chomsky, for instance, was monitored by the CIA for many, many years, David Miller at University of Bath has also been has experienced harassment online. There's an awful lot of hostility that you encounter in this area. I've been informally told as well that some academics would not receive any cooperation for similar research interviews. But because I've managed to sort of gain access and been working on this topic for 10 years, I'm managing to get a lot more access. And it's all about approach, which I'm going to come to. Academics are often seen as outsiders. And practitioners who are working on this topic in relation to security feel that their activities are misunderstood, so they're automatically defensive. I interviewed Dennis McBride, who's pictured here, who, following a military career, worked at the Washington, D.C. think tank, the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. They were contracted to produce propaganda during the early war on terror and are still very actively involved in that. He organised a campaign to drag professional associations such as the core staff at the American Psychological Association, who I believe you might have seen in the media recently, and also the American Sociological Association, to start assisting the military more in the war on terror. So he also commented to me that his attitude to academics. So he said, things have changed a little bit, but there's still this attitude that we get from academic social science in particular that comes across as if they're above, they're better than soldiers. They're not going to participate in what we call here baby killing. So other academics who've gained access for interviews have often been somehow connected to government, not very independent. They've gained their contacts already through practical work, and their allegiance is often still evident in their stance when they're writing. So, for instance, I would mention Phil Taylor on that, and Nancy Snow, who worked for the USIA. I got told, as a result, in my first ever postgraduate presentation, you're never going to get an interview on this topic. And, you know, people said, you know, intelligence operatives won't talk to you, because you're a Brit, the US military is never going to talk to you, because you're a woman, nobody will talk to you, it's a very masculine world, and so on. But my PhD supervisors were very supportive. My first interviewee wasn't terribly open. That was in 2004 though, and he introduced me to one or two other people. And from that, the introductions, like Andy was saying, are so valuable. And that was, I was able to do sort of snowball sampling, as you call it, where people introduce me to other people, and you gain credibility because, oh, they've spoken to so-and-so. And it enables you to work your way into a community in a sort of a trusted way. And gain some sort of, gain a little bit of a reputation, and also they wonder what the other person has said about the topic and want to put in their part. So that was a very useful kind of way of moving forward. And I found a maximisation strategy really important. As an academic researcher, you can play the long game. So for instance, it took me 10 years before I got my actual book out. I managed my online appearance as well, especially at first, not to arouse too much paranoia. And I waited and collected substantial data. There were some things that were hard to gain evidence on, so I waited, I held back, and eventually published on them. Once I got enough to look really, really strong, and so on. And then I wanted to come out with it all at once because I was scared that nobody would ever speak to me again. So I went about it that way. I was non-combative as well in my sort of use of language. So using language that was the sort of terminology that they would use, being honest but also being incredibly careful and strategic about communication. And you have to read the personality, and for some it helps to come over really naive and respectful. Some people you want to seem much more confident and knowledgeable, and it's not necessarily an advantage. So you play the person depending on what kind of how the approach is. So you want to also give encouraging reactions to what they're saying, and keep them speaking, but not looking like you are endorsing what they say. So that can be a very careful balance at times as well. And it's very difficult when you touch on topics that are very uncomfortable. So for instance, torture just suddenly comes up in a conversation and somebody is making a joke about it and laughing about it. And you naturally react to that. And you have to not show that if you want them to keep on talking and laughing. So things like that can be quite demanding on a researcher. And maintaining your boundaries is really important. You're using those kind of informal networks, and over time, over 10 years, maybe 15 years, getting closer and closer and closer. And actually, informality can drift. So people suddenly seem to believe that they're your friend, even though you never really, intended them to think this. And you're trying to be very professional. So you're dealing with those kinds of concerns as well. So it makes me I'm constantly maintaining this persona of neutrality, which really isn't you. You're not that persona of neutrality. And the challenges to the sense of self that come up through that are really uncomfortable at times. When someone's making racist statements and laughing about torture, you're finding abhorrent, it feels very uncomfortable not to respond. But you want them to keep talking, so you want to write about it. And it makes you question who they think this person is that they're talking to. So this idea that Andy mentioned of, am I being dishonest? But I'm being dishonest to dishonest people, so is that okay? These kinds of things are raised. I haven't lied, so therefore is it all right? You are constantly trying to engage in a dialogue with yourself as well as opening it up to wider academia of how you manage these things on a day-by-day basis. Our personality and our sense of self is confirmed to us in our own actions and responses, not just in our heads. And what we say and do confirms who we are in relation to others. So if there's a gulf between the two, it feels very wrong and it challenges the sense of self. If you're engaged in field work somewhere over a long period of time and you're surrounded by only these people, then you start to feel like you're not who you are. I have a small group of mentors who I've been speaking to, and I'm finding it very important to make myself and these relationships part of the subject of my research. Some lessons can be borrowed from ethnography. I keep a diary noting subjective reactions. And I realised early on that reaching for difficult interviews, it's exciting getting them. But students must be mindful that it's not about winning them at all costs. And it can feel that there's a lot to lose if you fail. So it's important to be aware of yourself. And it can be an emotional roller coaster too. So I've come to wonder if there's a shelf life as well on this methodology. If you're going to be very critical, then, you may well ultimately be putting people off talking to you. But my book came out, and the Pentagon were interested. I did a talk there, and they still seem to be interested in talking to me, which makes me a little uncomfortable in itself. It's like, well, what do they want now? So now I've got this sense of the spider and the fly, and they're trying to pull me into their web. Deepening access is interesting, and it raises other issues. Research progresses, you're building relationships with people. One added me on Facebook. I have an awareness of how they talk to each other about other academics as well, and things like that. And I try to position myself very carefully, but the level of access is kind of unusual, and it raises the problem of how far can you go if you want to really change things and still remain independent. You're faced with the invites to the think tanks, the invites to feed into practice, and you don't want to dirty your hands. Relationships change and evolve, and they need to be managed constantly. And they're happening amid a time of change in the media, of course, as well. So we have now mass surveillance. How paranoid should I be about such things? I've been engaging with security experts as well to sort of try and find ways to, manage these kinds of issues. And I'm happy to talk about that much more in questions, but I'm very aware that I'm running out of time. So thank you very much. Despite this, I would say interviewing and even ethnographic elements are not incompatible with critical, independent and robust research, but must be augmented with alternative data sources, new security protections that many researchers are still slow to be taking on. Thank you.
Fox Fine from University of the West of England. I just wanted to pick up on something that Emma said, but ask all of you. So how paranoid should we be? It's a reasonable point.
Over to these two.
Do you want to go first?
Paranoia means beyond knowledge. Para, beyond, knowledge. Paranoia will keep you safe. We have a sixth sense, and my survival often depends on knowing when to run, when to seek help, when to get more data. So I think that you should trust your intuition in terms of what is interesting to delve into, but also when you might be challenged and people that you need to be wary of. Now I've worked in China where I'm in the heart of the security community, which means I can't speak the language, like no one can understand me. I'm in their gated security community. I found a niche and I've got to get from there into a torture fair and photograph everyone, and knowing when to stop and run and get the data and give that amnesty is a question of time, and no one can teach you that. Trust your intuition.
Well,
You never be too paranoid.
no, I actually agree. I don't think you can be too paranoid. And, you know, I mean, we've discussed some of this as well at the data seminars and things like this, of you know, just how much we worry. And, you know, there seem to be differences in opinion on this, but I really just think that you can't be too careful. And actually, I think that, you know, okay, if I'm paranoid and I cover myself in every single way possible, you know, maybe it's not necessary, but at least I've done my best, you know. And, you know, if journalists at The Guardian are doing these things, then absolutely academics need to be prioritising it. Because there's very few people saying academics need to encrypt the data that they're, you know, or maybe to encrypt their emails and so on. We need to be thinking about these solutions as well. And in order for me to plan my research, things like that, to anticipate and not be anticipated, I need to have some cards, keep my cards close to me sometimes. And I think you need to have an upper hand in order to be able to do any research in this area. You're probably never going to get it, but you should at least do your best to protect yourself. Yeah, well, the best you can. Yes.
So I'm Vianne Bakir at Bangor University. I was just wondering then, where do you go for help? I mean, not reveal your... do you feel there is help if you think you need to reach out for help? And I'm just wondering what your strategies are, and not to compromise any sources or anything, but...
It's called stupidity. I met this guy on a train journey into the Arctic Circle, and he said, every individual, every organisation, every family has these sigma factors. This is the level of stupidity. We must all reduce our sigma factor and become less stupid. I thought, this guy's a nutter. Who is he? I said, oh, it's Rudy. It's Sir Rudolph Piles. He knows what he's talking about. He invented the H-bomb trigger. And it stuck with me. I mean, I've been in situations. I was in Afghanistan on the night of the revolution, and it was my 21st birthday, and I was completely off my head. And I just thought about the data. Coup d'etat was the voice that rang out, and I'm on the streets, there's tanks and helicopter gunships. I'm stoned out of my head. It's Afghanistan. And right next to me comes up a car, a Land Rover, with President Daoud. I've got like 6 feet between me and the new president. You've got to get the evidence, no one will believe you. And then I start walking away. And then the guy comes up with a machine gun and just says, camera! And I'm like, look, I've got all my holiday pictures in here, man. And it's like a light bulb moment saying, don't argue with a man with a machine gun. Revolution. And I think it's a heuristic thing. You must trust your instincts and that inner voice that says, time, you've got enough, reflect on it later, but go now. And sometimes there's no help. when Andrew Gilligan and I ended up in Jordan, in an arms fair in Jordan with Prince Andrew. And we didn't know what to do because Prince Andrew's jostling, he's been jostled by Iraqi security personnel. And we thought one picture, and I wouldn't need to work again, we could sell it to the gutter press in England, they'd all want that picture. And Andrew and I left the arms fair, one person took that picture, we went out, and we're looking over towards Iraq. And I said, what are you going to do, Andrew? And he said, if I play my cards right, and Andrew Gilligan, if you don't know him, is the guy that did the dodgy dossier scenario. He said, if I play my cards right, I'm going to be the BBC's correspondent in Iraq. When the shit hit the fan, I wrote to him saying, Andrew, what's about to happen to you is you're going to be fried. The Hindus have a phrase for it, it's called tapasya, straightening by fire. Everything that you believe to be true will be transcended. You're about to go through the gauntlet. I will stick by you, I'm your friend, but you're going to enter hell. And he did, but he came out the other side. And I think friendship networks, just saying, we're on your side, we're not going to question you, we're going to be with you, are really important. You know where your friends are, and the security services will be.
I would second that, and I would also say, okay, maybe you're not doing that kind of dangerous research, but even if it's not quite that sort of stuff, having networks of people who you trust is so important. And I think, you know, what you were saying, you know, there actually isn't an awful lot of facilities available to people at universities that are ready and waiting to be drawn upon. We don't have a lot of the technical know-how to do a lot of this stuff. Yes, there's information online, but we need to be sort of cooperating and talking and finding ways to work together to secure ourselves and to share knowledge on these topics as well, and to have each other's back. Having support networks and things like that for, you know, what I was saying about, like, things that are psychologically uncomfortable. I mean, there's some things that, you know, I don't particularly want us to say about, but, you know, that, you know, come up that you don't expect, and it's helpful to sometimes have people there to talk to when you need a friend who understands professionally as well. Any other questions?
Well, you take baby steps on that. I mean, the thing is that you don't know that you're being stupid when you're being stupid. The analogy I use with my students is it's like losing your virginity. Before it happens, you really think it's impossible. Everyone in the room knows what I'm talking about. And then afterwards, you realise that you need more practice. And the first 20 years are the hardest. And it's like that. Universities are full of compromise. In this university, there will be contracts with the military that will lead to control technologies in the future. You don't have to be amazingly brave, but you do have to be a little bit deviant and think, I think I see an application for that I need to share. And that mosaic, that networking, means that it's no longer egotistical, it's saying, it's righteous indignation. There are certain things that part of you says, up with that I shall not put. And that is the beginning of resistance. That's the beginning of saying, I want to build the future where humans are central rather than profit on machines. And even taking that thought, it's like a meme. Part of you says, well, okay, I'm not going to do really stupid stuff, really crazy stuff, but I can make a difference, and I'll do it in my way.
Yes, Richard, please introduce yourself before you end.
My name is Richard, I'm a PhD candidate. Forgive me, but as an activist myself, I get the impression you're an activist. I get the impression you're not. I know Emma isn't. How?
I have my moments, but no, I try to stay
I
away
think,
from it.
I
in order
think
to
this
keep my
week between
interviews
me,
coming.
you,
Yeah.
me, maybe a couple of others. How do you keep going as an academic? Because surely by now your career should be absolutely fried. And I'm interested in this ethical line because you yourself are now dealing with stuff which you said has made you feel uncomfortable, a little less uncomfortable now. At what point as academics do we actually say our role is to screw people up?
I can answer that, and it's a difficult one. I mean, sadly, at universities we're giving this tremendous freedom. We've got certain protections, but in general we don't use them. it makes us supine the whole ref process of trying to beam count on things that don't really matter, makes us less brave. I did far more intriguing things when I was director of an NGO than I would do now. But the last time I was in this city, I was, I don't know who I am sometimes, I was a member of a military network. I'd just signed up, and we ended up in the Cutlass Hall. And so in that role, it's dead boring. But the man next to me waiting for the taxi said, I've got £60 million worth of contracts in my bag. I said, who are you going to give them to? He said, 25 companies. What's the conditions? The conditions are that we will grow their business 5% a year for 5 years. They will expand by 25% because we'll look at the weakest link in their supply chain. And then you learn the lesson. No one's building weapons anymore. They're building components. So it's very hard to get a grip on that because there's thousands of components in a modern weapon system. But the twist in it is lots of those companies like Samsung have a public nice face out there. Fine, like Samsung TV, but they make robotic killing systems on the South Korean border. There's a weak link there, so it's finding that stuff.
Can I jump in there and just try and... my question really is, as academics, I mean, you work for Leeds Beckett University. Allegedly. So Leeds Beckett have got you as a contract as reader. Is there ever been a point at which Leeds Beckett has said to you, mate, you've got to back off. We can't let you be a leader here if you're going to keep doing that?
The thing about academia is that no one really is that interested in your work.
Okay.
I mean, the students are, and the students are really important. But within the hierarchy, it's really venal in terms of promotion and advancement, reputation. They only worry if I'm going to do something that's going to tarnish the reputation of the university. So if there's an impact, I mean, the last thing I did was on torture drug companies. Now, it could have gone either way. I'm part of a consortium that helps to ban drugs going in. Now that's a ref impact. That's a policy thing. So everything is about PR. It's all about telling the story. If you can tell the story in a way that is policy orientated, impactful, transform the language into anodyne, then it's brownie points, and that's all that really matters.
Can I say as well?
Yeah.
That is a really interesting question. And I think it also depends a little bit on who you are. So when I was a PhD student, coming out with things like that, when I'm very insecure still, and I'm still getting my interviews, things like that, being an activist then, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing. Now I can say anything I like, I think. You know, I don't feel worried about what I say in the same way. I also know that I've got that network, and there's only so many, I mean, some people might drop off. There might be some people who try to shit on me, or whatever, but you've got a reputation now, you know, and I have a secure position at a university, which, you know, my department they understand what I do and they value it. That goes a long way, I think. There are some people who, you know, I mean, there are always kind of things that happen, people who don't like what you say and do, but I don't feel like it's going anywhere, you know, and yeah, so I wouldn't, and I certainly didn't hold back on my book. I said everything that I wanted to say and made you know, very critical points, but I did it in such a way that I was careful about the language because I wanted to speak to many audiences rather than just the lefty.
The reaction to your book's been really interesting, as much as most of the people you were talking to at the time are still talking to you.
Yeah, and actually I managed to get a positive review in Spinwatch, which is quite a radical blog, as well as, you know, by a propagandist last week who on his blog to inform is to influence, he's written a review which is positive. So I've got quite right-wing people as well as the left who were both saying they like the book. So that was what I wanted to get, was to try and get the critical messages that I'm saying out to as wide a range of people as possible. And I don't think you can do that by doing polemics.
You know, I have a question that's related to this, which looks like there's maybe a pause in the audience questions. Okay, I'll have mine and then I'll call you. Which is, I sort of wanted to ask Emma in particular, right, sort of about, you mentioned that you gave a talk at the Pentagon after your book came out. And I think sort of more broadly, right, sort of the question of, right, sort of either, right, going native, which is sort of like while the research is going on, or in a way what I'm more interested in is, right, sort of the reception after your research comes out, right? So similarly, when my book came out, which is a study of terrorism experts, I was sort of terrified because I'd done all of these interviews, right, sort of done research in a sort of, been very sort of friendly and neutral, and I was sort of terrified when the book came out that I was going to get backlash from all these people saying that I misinterpreted them, that I was attacking them, that I was completely wrong. And in fact, the reaction was the opposite, was that I only got positive responses. Now, I'm sure there were people who didn't like the book, who just, you know, sort of didn't say things to me, but, you know, I got positive responses from a range of people in the terrorism studies field, which sort of threw me for a bit. You know, I'm sort of curious about that, right? Sort of what do you make of that sort of response when you get a positive response to your research, you know, which you thought was critical?
I'll be honest, it freaks me out a little. I don't understand it entirely, and I haven't quite worked out why they do that to some people and why they give very, very, very hostile reactions to others when they're saying not that different things. Yeah, so I'm still working that one out a little bit. But at the same time, I mean, I was really, really scared about the book coming out because I didn't hold back, as I said. And also I was scared about this Pentagon talk because I thought, well, I don't know who's going to be in that audience. And I did get negative, you know, fairly aggressive in some emails afterwards. But generally, actually, the reaction was very good. And I was saying things that were basically saying that some sections of the community were racist and so on. And I put evidence out there and so on. And I still got invited back to contribute to an exercise that they were doing and looking at how they can improve the way that they communicate. Now, I'm not...
How do we do better propaganda, Dr. Bryant?
Well, yes, essentially, what they're looking at is how do we propagandize more effectively,
yes,
usually. But how do you then influence? So I was like torn, and I was faced with this dilemma of like, should I be engaging with them on this, or shouldn't I? And then I thought, well, I can, you know, connect to the network and watch what they're doing, and if I want to say something and I'm happy with what I'm going to say, you know, then I think that would be useful. If I can make a critical comment or if I can use it in the way that I want to, then I will. And I see no problem with doing that sort of thing. But it's about, like, well, how far do you go? And always having that sort of reflection on what you're doing and why and what role it might be playing. But I don't think there's any clear ethics about it. It's very difficult to navigate.
Mine's much easier. There's been times where I've not liked what I've said, and then I get a bomb warning in the building. And so I've had a situation where in the building there's 2,000 pairs of eyes focused on the bomb squad arriving, just the whole drama of like the bomb squad arriving and then standing outside in the Manchester rain, and then hearing a name called out. Can you go back into the building with all the alarms going off because we don't understand the layout of your room? So there's a sort of fear thing there, can you manage that? But they normally come after me with lawyers. So one of the things in the presentation that I raced over was making a connection with pepper gas. Because you've seen in the press in the recent weeks that they're pepper gassing in Paris, they're pepper gassing all over the world. That pepper gas was researched at the medical school, but actually the authorization was given by a special agent Ward, whose wife gave him $57,000 as a kickback at a company called Lucky Strike Products. I made that allegation in a European Parliament report where I had some protected privilege. As soon as I left that, the company Zark, I mean you couldn't make it up, Zark International, sent me a lawyer's letter saying, retract, we want damages, we want you to humbly grovel. And I thought, where have I come across you before? I thought it was in Jordan, just before the war. And you left your stand vacant. And you stole everything on that table, including all your technical reports. It added to the burden of my duty-free. But in that report was the document that made the link. And I could write back to them saying, okay, sue me. I'd welcome the opportunity to show what a lying bunch of bastards you are. Please tell that to your client. The only other twist is I've been invited to speak to the Urban Warrior Conference. You never get to say this in real life, but as I walked through the door, they said, Dr. Wright, would you chair this conference? And I said, do you know who I am? And they said, it doesn't matter. You're a civilian. The rules say that you've got to be a civilian. There were people in that room that I thought were war criminals. They were talking about bayoneting civilians at the back of the room in coffee break, and how they'd carried out the attack on Fallujah. It was the armed warrior conference. And I thought, I'll get you. And so I stood up and said, and they didn't know who I was. So no one remembers who you are. And I stood up and said, it's Dr. Wright here, I'm from the UK, I should chair this conference with military precision, but before we start, I want 2 minutes of silence for all the victims of state terror. And like obedient soldiers, they all bowed and went, gotcha! Inside. And so you need those moments, but I think that it's a question of having multiple selves. Eventually you have multiple selves, and usually they don't meet except in drink.
Could we just ask a third?
I'm sorry, I have a few more people in the queue, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay. I'm sorry,
Can
Andy.
you just clarify the question again?
I just wanted to ask you, you're dealing with technologies that clearly are immoral and in some effect. At what point do you draw the line? Where would you draw the line? How would you draw the line?
I think in addition to studying the technology and studying the companies and other actors who are using these, I'm kind of particularly interested in where we go next. So once I've understood, so what? So one of the things that I'm finding as I kind of assess the technologies is kind of the various ways in which it's legal or illegal. As it stands, emotion detection is spectacularly legal if it doesn't identify a person individually. There's a loophole in forthcoming European legislation, what's called the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, and existing privacy regulations. So I'm thinking, right, okay, we've got a loophole, we have an issue here. So I'm kind of working with a number of companies who have a self-interest in promoting themselves as using this technology in ethical ways. So for example, gaming companies. Some companies are kind of building games and want to use kind of information about our faces. They don't want personal data, they just want to be able to use reactions to change the gameplay. They're not saving the data, they're not harvesting the data, it's just about enhancing the gameplay at that second. So they're quite interested in building an ethical code of conduct. So what they're after I'm doing, I'm collecting a range of these companies who are interested in building ethical guidelines for motion detection technology, working with self-regulators, and keeping the policy people that I have that I'm kind of project partners with, keeping them informed of what's going on. So in essence, there's kind of a twofold thing happening. One, I'm looking to build a self-regulatory framework for use of motion detection technologies, but also being really absolutely clear on where the gaps are in legislation and kind of keeping people in Brussels who are working on this stuff in mind.
It's also about what you want to achieve. I mean, some things that you might do might have more public-oriented outcomes that you know, but other things you might be going for policy. If I can make even slightly anything in what the US military do slightly less racist, then I'm happy with that. You know, if I can do something, you know, that would be useful.
Can I just add in that? You've got to go with Paranoia. We're on the panel, and I respect Andy's work. I think it's incredibly useful. But my paranoid approach, and mark this, I hope I'm dead by the time it comes true. I'm not ever been wrong on these predictions. In a future time, where there's 100 to 2,000 million people on the move because of climate change, many of them will be Muslims. The whole trope at that time is they're a threat. The whole gateways in terms of Europe will be closed off, sealed. To get through, it's torture at a distance. To enter Europe, you must be interrogated by a machine. You'll be detected for lying. Have you got any friends that are interlinked with these organisations? Electric shock at a distance, looking at their emotions and putting through warehouse processes in terms of migration control, where mild torture, torture light, might be the price of entering the secure gateways to a Europe that might be protected from climate change. Nightmare scenario, miles away from what Andy wants to go to. But with President Trump in the White House, with the Mexican border sealed, we'll see inklings of a different way. And it won't be choose that. It will be, would you accept a little increment for greater security? And it's a seduction. It's not like either or, black or white. It's just a little nibble, a little bit of pain, a little bit of processing just to enter. And we've all accepted it over the last decade.
I mean, this sounds like the situation we're somewhat already in.
Can I just say
Yeah,
one very
and then we have some more questions.
Can you pause the
Go back to
camera a
Ryan.
second, please, Kelly?
And I just finished journalism master's here at Sheffield University. I don't have a clear question really. I've kind of spent the last few years straddling this idea of whether to dip into academia and pursue a PhD or remain a journalist. And I keep flipping back and forth. But my main goal really is to try to get information from academia to people. So I'm sticking with journalism, I think. My main question really is, in your experience, do you think that there's any point to even have like a pseudonym or try to keep any kind of safety in what you're reporting because the people who you would be worried about would know who you are anyway? I mean, is there any kind of, I don't know, is there any way of kind of remaining underneath the limelight while kind of exposing things?
There's a thing in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where there's a machine, there's a guy that tells you just how unimportant you are on the scale of things. So I never use a pseudonym, but I do have one. I mean, if you look up Robin Ballantyne, you'll find me. And that's just to play with the academics, so they're quoting you without realising. And to share the glory. So if there was a joint article, instead of fighting about precedence, it just makes a fake name. You wouldn't have bothered, but academia is important in giving you a space. So any of us might promote our masters in terms of human rights and stuff to give you a space to have time to gather that. Because if you're a journalist, you're always working the next deadline. And we have the privilege of having data, free journals, and access to time. But networking is the key. And if you can network then and have a name, I mean, initially I set up a network called the Transnational Research and Company Inquiry Service, and we did that simply to get money. I spent the biggest amount of money on the note paper, and the reason was the note paper smelled of Doric columns. If you saw the note paper, you think, my God, they have 100 staff. There were 2 people and a dog in a very building, but we got the first 100,000. And that's, I think, looking at hybrid organisations between academia and journalism is where we've got to go. Because we think you've got an impact if 40 people have downloaded your article. You know, if less than 500,000 people read a Guardian piece, it's a bad piece. So somehow, to do what we want to do, we've got to get critical mass. And only do that through journalistic work. So there's got to be this hybrid, and that's what we should explore.
To come at that slightly differently, I'd probably say something, again, slightly different, that the academic badge is incredibly useful. So rather than being a hybrid, a pure play academic can get you into a lot of places. So in terms of talking to commercial companies, if I'm seen as affiliated with other actors, it makes access more difficult. Whereas what I've been able to do is talk to 80, 90 different companies, really high level people. And because I'm an academic, because I'm always an academic, that's okay, which is kind of interesting.
This is very true.
I'm sure it's been incredibly useful for you.
For me too, because like actually, I specifically say to people, I am not a journalist as well, because I'm in a journalism studies department. That makes a big difference. I was really worried about joining a journalism studies department for that reason, because I didn't want to be seen as a journalist, because I know my interviewees, they view academics and journalists differently. Academics in the US as well, American interviewees, they will see academics as part of the system as well, in a way that I don't think they are as much in the UK. We're much more oppositional. But they will see me, oh, she's an academic, she's not a journalist, because they will not talk in the open way that they with me, with journalists.
I'll come back to you, because it reminded me, I did have an alter ego. And it's part of the historic record. The Supergun affair The guys that were at the heart of that, Astra was an arms company making supergun. There were politicians dipping their hands in, including senior Tories. Millions went out from arms deals. And the evidence was in 2,000 box files. The Department of Trade and Industry made an order in the High Court to have them all destroyed because of the cost to the public purse of maintaining 2,000 box files in storage. We went to court, and my alter ego was killing secrets. So I was Dr. Wright of Killing Secrets. I was as near as you are to the judge. And they made their statement, QCs all walked in, and I said, I'll pay. And they all turned around, and the judge said, who are you? And I said, I'm Dr. Wright of Killing Secrets. And one day, this is before the Iraq War, I said, one day, people might want to know who's arming Iraq. He said, where will you put these documents? And I pulled in my briefcase and said, it's an affidavit from the court bank. They will store the documents in the bank. And the judge went, case adjourned. And I thought, right, and I escaped to South Africa that night so they couldn't get me. So there's a process where you can play with the names for impact, and that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Ruth Beckley from the University of Kent. I have a question for all of you about duties and responsibilities of care to our PhD students. Because it is one thing for us as employees of the university to do these kinds of things based on experience. It's another to help our PhD students embark on this kind of research, and I'm conscious that there are such people in the room. Not least because, first of all, we have to help them navigate ethical approval processes. We also have to think about the risks they're bringing upon themselves, and whether we like it or not, we have to think about the risk of liability for the university. So a good example would be the Cambridge University PhD student who was recently killed in Cairo for his work, where he was undertaking PhD research but was murdered, probably by the regime, tortured as well. He was also doing journalistic work and work with trade unions. And I think it's it's important that we are here talking about the types of research we do and how we do it, the things we've done and different ways and risks we've taken. But I wondered if you could get your views on what our responsibilities are to our PhD students who might be thinking about these sorts of activities.
I think that the thing that concerns me most is the supervisor's lack of understanding of the topics usually. And I embarked on, my supervisors were great, but I embarked on something that was quite, nobody had done really, in my immediate circle. So I was kind of figuring it out for myself as I went along, and I think I found it very exciting. And I think a lot of students, they think, oh my God, I've got an interview at the White House, or I've got and they feel like $1 million. And it's very pressured, and they get very timid. They, handling those kinds of pressures. There's a lot of places they don't actually teach elite interviewing. How do you handle that kind of thing? And I think that can be, you need to have confidence to be able to manage all of those pressures, and you don't at the beginning. You just don't. You might think you do, but you don't. And I think the preparation that's there and available to students is not good enough. I do a lecture for this university on elite interviewing, where I talk about a lot of these things. But they're very young. They're very new to all of this stuff, and they don't know a lot of politics of just how mean and dirty it is, and just who might manipulate them in what ways. And I think I don't think that they should not be doing it, but they need to be well prepared, and they need to have a supervisor who can introduce them to the right people and connect them with support networks and prepare them in the best ways, I think. If it's going out to other countries and war zones as well, also that throws in other things that are, not my expertise. But I'm talking from my particular research perspective.
I'll give you a completely different point of view. Students that take my courses begin week one having nightmares. So the whole thing is about responsibility, because everything has to be factually based. So you're saying you're in a constructed world. What's between your ears isn't the truth. What you're living through now is constructed. And in the course of this course, your mindset will start tuning in to see. What you see isn't the truth, it's what the gestalt and what you've got inside your head. So even that's the responsibility, because some of our students, we've got something like 16 nations in one of the classes I teach. Some of them have been tortured. And it's like, well, okay, I need to give you that freedom not to be in class for those sessions. In terms of PhDs, I think my intuition is I wouldn't take any PhD on this journey unless they were obsessed by an extremely good. And I haven't met such a student yet. At Masters, we usually insist on paper stuff. The most dangerous stuff I've had in personal experience is a student who wanted to interview the Palestinian leadership. And that was his family connections. And I said, I don't want that to happen. But he said, I'm going back home and this is what I'll do there. And I said, well, you shouldn't. And if it starts to get dangerous, and this is where you jump the boundary, I personally will pay for you to return ahead. Don't let cost be an inhibition against you returning. We got a note from him asking for an extension, a picture of his parents' house that had been bombed. He's okay, he's fine, but my intuition is no, it's got to come from the student. And the only time it has happened, I think, is probably at Omega. So working in an NGO, we would never get insurance, we'd never get clearance. Our testing was to say, are you any good? You can do the bullshit, are you any good? And we'd throw them into a situation where they sink or swim. And so our testing was ethically dubious. Because if you collapsed, you were no use to us. I don't think we ever had a case of anyone imploding. It was self-selecting, and the best students that come through that process you cannot tell that they work for NGO, that they work with the police, or they work with the Home Office or the Foreign Office. They're that good. But I think that the question you ask is very, very appropriate, and I, for one, would never cross it. I would never urge a student to do the work that I've done. It would be self-selecting, it would be a motivation from them. And they would tend to be older. I mean, I'm probably the oldest person in the room. And for me, I can take risks. It's like playing poker with your life. But younger people, no, I'm not going to take that responsibility. But the twist is that if you start studying people, they become part of the equation. And I had one staff member threatening to quit because somebody had committed suicide because of our work. And I said to him, look, you've just turned a mirror to that person saying, you're actually despicable. And his wife said, I'll see you in court. I'm going to sue you. And I said, I welcome the opportunity. You're a bastard, your husband was. And I've got all the documents. He was supplying torture to these regimes. Where it's become a real thing wasn't us processing, but it was indirect. We had a student that had the computer of the 7/7 bombers. He was a bit of a smelly student. He was older. He was about 45, going out with a woman that was 22, smelt. Very odd, Asperger-like character, but he had the computer of the 7/7 bombers before the bombing. And he went to the police. And he said, I think these guys are planning something. Now, if they'd listened to that student, MI5 would not have doubled in size. We wouldn't have the security apparatus. They would have gone round in Bradford and nicked them. But because he was a bit smelly and they had other things on their mind, they said, we know who the bad guys are. They only got interested after the bombing in terms of covering their backs. And I don't think we were informed about what happened. He never graduated. And they wanted to contain the information about what he'd done for political purposes. And I think that in that instance, it's like the Protect agenda. We're not ready. We should have conferences more like this and debate those issues. As the international situation worsens, we need collectively to protect each other and to defend each other.
Certainly as well in propaganda research, I think it's more often I'm meeting people who've been doing interviews similarly, but haven't been asking difficult questions. And I think they feel a little intimidated by it. They don't really know what they're doing. They don't have the supervision that will prepare them. and then are producing work which doesn't push very hard, and they know what's going on, but they don't feel like they can then say it. And actually, in order to be able to do PhDs that are really useful and not being manipulated by those powerful people, it's really important that those students have support, and I don't see that being provided. And I think, if anything, that then produces a body of work which legitimates rather than critically analysing.
Great, I think oh, sorry, Andy.
I didn't have a great deal to add, but I think to speak particularly to your point about kind of students and harm, I kind of agree with Steve, where I would never ever put a student in that way. You mentioned kind of single swimmer. I'm not quite sure that's...
No, that's not academia. That's Omega is a different kettle of fish.
Right.
I mean, we food line. So if you're going to be part of Omega, it was like you either one of us or you're not one of us. And if you're one of us, you're good. And if you're not good,
But I think it kind of begs the question as well, is kind of what actually is academic study? Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff, possibly that we're talking about today, is actually beyond academic study. And certainly we're the first student in that line of thought.
So I think we'll take one more question and then we'll break for lunch. So
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Eddie Borges-Rey. I'm from the University of Stirling. We've been talking, methodologically speaking, about approaches such as ethnography and things that has to do with a lot of interviewing people. And when it comes now to data, which is basically, computerized infrastructures that are basically not dealing with a lot of human interaction, how would you do your approach in terms of identifying power dynamics and power struggles in those confines?
Oh, an easy one. The best study I ever did on that topic was on Northern Ireland, yeah? So I'm a young PhD, before the authorities came in and nicked my work. I got the best data on any internal conflict in human history. Every house search, every kneecapping, every assassination, the army, the IUC, everyone gave me the data. My supervisor was a genius at modelling. So in terms of looking at power dynamics, but it's a twist. You think this is real, but a bird isn't seeing time the way that you do. My supervisor looked at that material of data, and he could look at the telexes between China and India and tell me when they went to war. Because when they started responding to their own behaviour and got locked in, and both sides got locked in and became autistic, and then they go to war. We spotted the same behaviour in Northern Ireland in terms of weapons being used, in terms of assassinations, at a time level, which very few academics talk about. Using multivariate time series analysis, we were able to say it's extremely dangerous there. Your internal processes are creating a lock-in. When the police raided, that was the only thing they left. It was so complicated, no one could understand it. Even now, I'm thinking, it's looking at 50 variables, changing each variable as they're changing themselves in time, as the whole conflict system metabolizes. In reality, there's 100,000 variables that most of us have gone through today. Academics cannot model at that level. And I made a vow at that point that in future, I will only research topics that the special branch should understand and would want to steal. So I left all of that methodological stuff behind because it was only accessible to a very rarefied mathematical elite. And now it's like research that makes a difference. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think we've got to be careful about being too abstract.
I'm not a data whiz, so I'll pass that on.
And neither am I.
Okay, but I think maybe some of the speakers in the second panel in the afternoon will touch on some of these issues of working with data as...
But I published, it's multivariate time series, Northern Ireland conflict, it's online so you can read it.
Yeah. So thanks very much. Let's thank our first panel. And we'll have lunch downstairs in the lobby, and we will reconvene at 1 for our second panel.